is the year that they are going to have a vaccine. However, for South Africa, it looks like perhaps we might have to wait a bit longer, perhaps until around the middle of next year before we could see a vaccine locally.
Well, we know of close on to 170 vaccines that are being tested right across the entire world. And the key question here is who is going to end up at the finishing line, because we know they are at various stages in terms of clinical trials. And now we know that many are being given the jab. We've heard about Russia, where they're rolling out something like 2 million. You spoke about the United Kingdom. But the key question here is which company is going to basically come up with the winning jab?
Yeah, so I think, it's important to note that there are hundreds, as you mentioned, of different vaccines being tested. About a handful of those made it to the final stages of testing. So basically, when it comes to a vaccine, it gets tested in multiple different stages. So it starts with being tested in the lab, then you have animal studies, then you progress to human trials. And then in human trials, there are 3 phases. And there are just over a dozen that made it to the final stage of the human trials. And at this point, we have 4 candidates which have released early data from those phase 3 trials. And I think, when you're talking about which one is going to be the first out of the gate, it's important to note that in the context of COVID-19, just being the first is not enough. We don't just need one solution. In fact, the more vaccines we have, the more we keep testing and the more options we have, the better, because the reality is, this is a global pandemic. Billions of people around the world need to be vaccinated. We've never needed such a mass vaccination. Manufacturers aren't able to make that many vaccines. So the more options we have, the more companies could make a vaccine and the more options for other countries to procure vaccines and to avoid a situation where all of the vaccines are being concentrated in particular countries.
Well, Aisha, we're still not out of the woods yet at this point in time, because there are still many unanswered questions as far as the vaccine is concerned, and also unknown factors in terms of how well this vaccine really work or will be working.
Yes. So, we have very promising data that's come out. Obviously, this is excellent news. We should be very pleased with the results that we have so far from these 4 vaccines. But at the same time, there is still a lot we don't know when it comes to vaccines. And that's not to say that the vaccine is unsafe or that people shouldn't be getting vaccinated when it becomes available. But when it comes to research and testing a vaccine, there are some questions, especially during this accelerated period with COVID, that we may only find out later down the line. So, for instance, we don't know how long immunity lasts, which is we don't know how long after you get the vaccine you'll be protected for. So it could be a short-term protection or it could be a long-term protection. That's something we'll only find out as more and more people get the vaccine, because those kind of long-term implications are something you can only see through massive rollouts. There are also, for some, particularly the AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine, there are some questions around, how well does it work in older populations. Pfizer is launching a new trial to test how well its candidate works in younger populations, because standard protocol is when you're testing a vaccine, you don't test it on young children before you know that it's safe in adults. So we now have the first evidence to show that these vaccines are safe in adults. So they're beginning to see whether we could vaccinate children with it. So there's a lot of population where we still don't know exactly how this vaccine is going to work, and we don't know, how long people will be protected for. But even with all of these question marks, this is still a major breakthrough for this year, and it holds great promise for people when we start to see vaccines become available next year.
Aisha, countries are already starting to think about the vaccine, but more importantly, in terms of the cost factor, because this is what countries will be required to do, and even us here in South Africa, where we will be required to buy massive amounts of these vaccines. And just from an affordability perspective, particularly looking at nations, the poorer nations, and how these vaccines will be rolled out, particularly in countries where these vaccines are not affordable.
Mm. Yeah, so this is a problem that we saw even before we had results, where richer countries that had that money available were investing millions of dollars or pounds or euros or whatever it was that their currency was, in doing direct deals with pharmaceutical companies. So that was before we knew if a vaccine worked. Countries were paying money to companies to buy that vaccine on the off chance that it produced results. South Africa didn't have the expendable income to do that. We're not rich enough to, invest millions of rands into a product we don't know can work. And so there was a separate initiative which was set up, which is basically called COVAX, and it's an agreement that was meant to allow poorer countries to get access to a COVID vaccine at a lower cost. So South Africa is intending to participate in that agreement, but within that agreement, poorer countries, so that's low and middle income countries, are able to get access to a vaccine at a reduced or subsidized rate, which is, they're expecting those countries to pay around $2, which is around 60 Rand per dose. However, even though South Africa is participating in that agreement, we are technically classified as a upper middle income country. And basically what that means is that even though we're part of this agreement, we are not considered poor enough to qualify for a subsidized rate. So we would still need to be paying a higher price for a vaccine. And essentially what that means for South Africa and procuring a vaccine is that we need to think very carefully about which vaccine we want to be sourcing. So yes, there are vaccines like Pfizer's and Moderna which have 94 to 95% efficacy rates, but those vaccines are incredibly expensive. They cost around $30, so they're around 600 Rand, and Moderna's cost up to 500 Rand per dose. And it's a 2-dose regimen, which means that people need to receive 2 injections. So we would essentially be paying up to 1,000 Rand per person vaccinated. And when it comes to just on a cost level, those 2 vaccines are simply too expensive for a country like ours. And the end goal with vaccination is you want as many people vaccinated as possible, because that gives us the most protection and offers us the best chance of fighting this virus. So South Africa needs to be looking at procuring a vaccine that's much cheaper, more affordable, and easy to transport and get to people who need it, which in this case, it does look like AstraZeneca, the AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine fits that criteria a lot better, because it's one of the cheaper vaccines that have produced results at the moment, and is also has very easy storage requirements and could be easily rolled out in the country.
Well, Aisha, I must say it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you this morning on News and Views. We wish you well, and please take care of yourself. And as always, Jazakallah, shukran for your time.
Thank you so much.
Aisha Abdool Karim, health reporter at Bhekisisa Centre for Health Journalism, with us this morning as the vaccine for COVID-19 as the race continues. And just to give you an idea, talking about the cost of the vaccine, the US government paid 1.9 billion for the first 100 million doses of the vaccine. And with that, we are straight on to 9 a.m. and we're heading for the news. We come back. We still have got a lot more coming up on the show this morning. Stay with us.